A millionaire cowboy paid off a stranger's debt and demanded marriage in return. But the reason he chose her had been hidden for years. The bank door slammed open so hard, the glass rattled. A folded bank draft hit Vernon Pike's desk. Savannah Reed felt her knees weaken as the rancher across the room removed his hat and said only a few words. Outside, wagon wheels groaned through the dust of Dry Hollow. Inside, every face turned toward her. Then she noticed something even stranger, the look in Garrett Hayes' eyes. What do you think Garrett was really hiding? Share your guess below. The summer of 1889 had been cruel to Medicine Bow Valley. Dust clung to fence posts. Creeks ran shallow. The hills beyond Dry Hollow looked faded beneath the Wyoming sun. Savannah Reed stood beside the counter of Vernon Pike's bank with her hands folded tightly in front of her. The room smelled of ink, ledgers, and old wood warmed by heat. A paper lay on the desk. 3 days. That was all the time left. Across from her, Vernon Pike adjusted his spectacles and tapped the document with one finger. Your family's debt comes due Friday morning. Savannah lowered her eyes to the figures written in black ink. The amount might as well have been $1,000. The family who had raised her barely had enough money to buy flour. Outside, wagon wheels rattled past the bank windows. Inside, no one spoke. Finally, Mrs. Reed, her adoptive mother, wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. We've sold everything we can. Vernon Pike nodded as though discussing the weather. Then the alternative remains. Savannah knew exactly what he meant. A labor contract. Years of work. Years she would never get back. Her stomach tightened. She had spent most of her life sewing clothes, washing linens at the boarding house, and keeping records for merchants who never remembered her name. Yet somehow, it had never been enough. Vernon slid another paper across the desk. Sign this Friday and the debt disappears. The room went still. Then the bank door opened. A gust of hot wind swept inside. Boots crossed the wooden floor. Everyone turned. Garrett Hayes stepped through the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, quiet. The richest rancher in the valley rarely entered town unless business demanded it. Even Vernon Pike looked surprised. Mr. Hayes. Garrett removed his hat. I heard there was a debt. Vernon recovered quickly. Nothing that concerns you. Garrett placed a folded bank draft on the desk. It does now. The paper unfolded. Vernon's expression changed. The amount covered every dollar, every fee, every interest charge. Silence spread across the room. Savannah stared at the document. She couldn't understand what she was seeing. Why? She whispered. Garrett finally looked at her. His gray eyes were steady. Not cold, not warm. Simply certain. Because I intend to marry you. The words landed harder than thunder. Mrs. Reed gasped. Someone outside stopped talking. Even Vernon Pike froze. Savannah felt the floor tilt beneath her. You don't even know me. Garrett's gaze never moved. I know enough. The next days passed like a dream she couldn't wake from. People stared wherever she went. Women whispered behind store windows. Men stopped talking when she entered a room. By sunset, the entire valley knew. At 19, Savannah Reed was going to marry Garrett Hayes. The night before the wedding, she stepped outside the boarding house to breathe. Voices drifted from the alley beside the bank. She recognized Vernon Pike immediately. Good thing Hayes stepped in, he muttered. Another man laughed softly. If not? Vernon's answer came low and ugly. If not, the girl would have belonged to us by now. Savannah froze. The words sent a chill through the warm summer night. A board creaked beneath her foot. The voices stopped. She hurried away before they could see her. The next morning, she married Garrett Hayes in the small church at Dry Hollow. No music, no celebration, only signatures, a handshake from the preacher, and dozens of curious eyes. By evening, a wagon carried her north through Medicine Bow Valley. Red cliffs glowed beneath the setting sun. Miles of grassland stretched toward distant mountains. When the wagon finally climbed a ridge, Savannah looked up. Iron gates stood ahead. Beyond them rose Hayes Ridge Ranch. Corrals, barns, windmills, fields, more buildings than she could count. The gates opened. As the wagon rolled inside, Savannah realized something strange. Nothing about the place matched the stories people told in town, and nothing about Garrett Hayes matched the man she thought she had married. The uncertainty settled deeper as the wagon continued toward the ranch house. For the first time since the wedding, she wondered if the greatest surprise of her life was only beginning. The main house sat on a rise overlooking the valley. White curtains moved behind wide windows. Beyond it stood red barns, water towers, bunkhouses, and long corrals where cattle drifted like dark shadows in the evening light. Savannah expected servants rushing about and people staring. Instead, the yard felt calm. A woman with silver hair stepped onto the porch before the wagon stopped. "You must be Savannah." Her voice carried neither curiosity nor judgment. "I'm Martha Quinn." Savannah climbed down carefully. Her wedding dress had already gathered dust from the road. Martha offered a small smile. "Come inside. You've had a long day." Garrett carried her suitcase himself. That surprised her more than anything. The house smelled of coffee, pine boards, and fresh bread. No grand chandeliers, no marble floors, just a solid ranch home built by people who worked. Martha led Savannah upstairs. "This room is yours." Savannah stopped in the doorway. A quilt lay folded across a clean bed. A pitcher of water sat on the washstand beside a small vase of wildflowers. "Yours. Not theirs, not borrowed." The word lingered. At supper, Garrett spoke little. Owen Briggs joined them, dusty from the range. The foreman nodded politely. "Ma'am." No one asked uncomfortable questions. No one mentioned the marriage. Only cattle prices, fence repairs, and a shipment expected from Cheyenne. Later that evening, Garrett placed a ring of keys beside her plate. Savannah frowned. "What are these for?" "The records office." She blinked. "The records? You kept books at the boarding house. How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know who I trust." The answer raised more questions than it solved. The next morning, Savannah followed Martha to a small office behind the main house. Shelves lined the walls. Ledgers filled every cabinet. Receipts were tied with twine. Invoices from rail depots in Laramie and Medicine Bow sat stacked beside shipping manifests. Garrett opened a ledger. "I'd like you to review the accounts." Savannah stared at him. "You want me to handle ranch books? I want you to tell me if something looks wrong." Then he left. Just like that. No test. No lecture. Only trust. Days passed. Savannah settled into a rhythm. Morning coffee. Office work. Afternoon walks through the ranch. Evening meals. The workers slowly warmed to her. Most of them. Not all. One afternoon, a carriage rolled into the yard. Savannah recognized it immediately. Beatrice Pike stepped out wearing a pale blue traveling dress. Her smile never reached her eyes. "I was hoping to see Garrett." Martha's expression hardened. "He's inspecting the north pasture." Beatrice finally looked at Savannah. "Oh." The single word carried enough meaning. Her gaze drifted over Savannah's simple dress. How quickly things change. Savannah met her eyes calmly. "Yes, they do." Beatrice laughed softly. You seem comfortable for someone who arrived only days ago. I work here. You're his wife, Beatrice replied. At least on paper. The silence that followed felt sharp. Before Savannah could answer, Owen appeared from the barn. Miss Pike, Mr. Hayes isn't receiving visitors today. The carriage left soon afterward, but the chill remained. That night, Savannah worked late in the records office. A shipment ledger caught her attention. Numbers didn't match. Freight charges had doubled. Another file showed missing inventory. Then another, and another. She sat straighter. Someone had been moving money through the ranch accounts. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to matter. As she returned the ledgers, her hand brushed against a small wooden box hidden behind old documents. Curious, she lifted the lid. Inside lay a faded photograph, a yellowed letter, and a name written in careful ink. Clara Reed. Her mother's name. Savannah froze. The room suddenly felt very still. She stared at the photograph, then at the letter, then back at her mother's name. A question she had never thought to ask settled heavily in her chest. Why would Garrett Hayes keep these, and how long had he known who she really was? Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Inside, Savannah sat alone beneath the lamplight, holding a secret that had just changed everything. For the first time since arriving at Hayes Ridge, she was no longer wondering why Garrett married her. She was wondering how long he had been watching from a distance. The lamp burned low in the records office. Savannah sat alone at Garrett's desk with the photograph resting in her hands. The woman in the picture wore a simple dress and stood beside a riverbank. Even faded by time, Savannah recognized her. Her mother. The same eyes, the same gentle smile. A floorboard creaked behind her. She looked up sharply. Garrett stood in the doorway. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. His gaze moved from her face to the photograph, then to the open box. He understood immediately. Savannah rose slowly. How long? She asked. The question came out softer than she intended. Garrett removed his hat. A long time. The silence stretched. Outside, crickets sang beyond the office window. Inside, the air felt heavy. You knew my mother. Garrett nodded. I knew of her. Savannah swallowed. Then tell me why. For a moment, he seemed older than usual. Not tired, just burdened by something carried for years. Come with me. He led her outside. The evening had cooled. Stars were beginning to appear above the Wyoming hills. They walked beyond the main house toward a low rise overlooking the valley. The cattle were settling for the night. Wind moved through the grass. Garrett stopped near a weathered fence rail. 18 years ago, he said quietly, my father nearly died in a spring flood. Savannah listened. The river south of Dry Hollow overflowed after 3 days of rain. He looked toward the dark horizon. His horse went down. The current took him. Savannah remained still. Your mother saw it happen. Garrett's voice lowered. She went into the water before anyone else moved. The image formed in Savannah's mind. Cold water, mud, a swollen river, one woman risking everything. She pulled him out. Garrett nodded. My father never forgot it. The wind stirred between them. Neither did I. Savannah looked down at the photograph. My parents never spoke about that. Most good people don't speak about the things they do for others. For the first time, a faint smile touched Garrett's face. Then it faded. When your parents died, my father asked me to keep watch. Savannah looked up sharply. Watch. Not interfere. Not control your life. He chose each word carefully. Just make sure you were safe. Pieces began falling into place. The occasional stranger who paid a medical bill after she had been sick as a child. The school books that appeared one winter when no one could afford them. The merchant who unexpectedly forgave a small debt. Things she had never understood. You? Garrett nodded once. The answer left her speechless. They stood in silence. The moon rose above the valley. Finally, Savannah asked the question that mattered most. Then why marry me? Garrett leaned against the fence. Because Vernon Pike wasn't offering a job. Her chest tightened. The memory of that strange conversation outside the bank returned immediately. If not, the girl would have belonged to us by now. Garrett looked directly at her. He planned to trap you. The words landed heavily. Years of labor, debt extensions, more contracts. Savannah's fingers tightened around the photograph. He would have owned your future. The night seemed quieter. Far away, a coyote called. Garrett looked back toward the ranch lights. I couldn't allow that. Savannah lowered her eyes. For weeks, she had wondered whether she was simply a business arrangement, a debt, a responsibility. Now she saw something else, something much harder to explain. You could have helped without marrying me. Garrett did not answer immediately. That silence told her more than words. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Maybe. Savannah felt her heartbeat quicken. Neither looked directly at the other. The distance between them suddenly felt smaller. Not because either moved, because something hidden had finally been spoken aloud. The next weeks passed differently. Morning coffee appeared beside her ledger before she arrived. A fence gate she struggled with was quietly repaired. During long rides across the ranch, Garrett slowed his horse whenever rough ground appeared ahead. Small things, easy to miss, impossible to ignore once noticed. One afternoon, Savannah stood beside Owen Briggs reviewing cattle inventory. The foreman frowned at a stack of documents. These came from the county office. Savannah took them. Her expression changed almost immediately. What is it? Owen asked. She handed the papers to Garrett. His jaw tightened as he read. Several parcels of Hayes Ridge land had been marked for seizure. Not hundreds of acres, thousands. Pasture land, water access, grazing routes. The heart of the ranch, Owen swore under his breath. There has to be a mistake. Garrett kept reading. There isn't. Savannah saw something she had never seen before. Concern. Real concern. The kind a man tries to hide and cannot. Who filed this? Owen asked. Garrett folded the papers slowly. His eyes grew colder. There's a name. Savannah looked down. At the bottom of the filing notice sat a familiar signature. Vernon Pike. The evening sun dipped lower across Medicine Bow Valley. Far below, the grasslands glowed gold. But for the first time since arriving at Hayes Ridge, Savannah felt a shadow stretching across everything they had built. Because if the papers were real, Vernon Pike wasn't finished. And if Hayes Ridge lost that land, the ranch itself might not survive. Autumn slipped toward winter faster than anyone expected. The grass turned pale across Medicine Bow Valley. Frost appeared along fence rails before sunrise. Each morning Garrett rode out earlier and returned later. The strain showed in small ways. Coffee left untouched. Long silences at supper. Maps spread across the dining table after dark. Savannah noticed all of it. One evening she found Garrett sitting alone in the records office. A kerosene lamp burned beside him. The seizure notices lay open on the desk. He looked tired. Not physically. The kind of tired that came from carrying responsibility for hundreds of people. If the court approves Pike's claim, he said quietly, the south grazing land goes first. Savannah sat across from him. What happens then? The herd shrinks. And after that? The ranch follows. The words settled heavily between them. Outside, cold wind rattled the window glass. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Garrett folded the documents and pushed them aside. "We'll find another way." But Savannah noticed something. For the first time since she had known him, he sounded uncertain. The legal fight began 2 weeks later. Vernon Pike arrived in Dry Hollow with survey maps, deeds, and witnesses. Judge Wilcox scheduled a hearing before Christmas. Rumors spread quickly. Some townspeople already believed Hayes Ridge had lost. Others whispered that Vernon Pike planned to buy the land himself once it was seized. One afternoon, Eli Turner rode out to the ranch. His horse was covered in road dust. The young lawyer carried a stack of papers tied with string. He spent 3 hours reviewing records with Garrett. When he finally stood, his expression was grim. The county copies all support Pike's claim. Garrett leaned back in his chair. Then someone changed them. Probably. "Can you prove it?" Eli looked down. "No." The room fell silent. Savannah sat nearby organizing freight receipts. Something about that answer bothered her. She began reviewing old ledgers again, then shipping manifests, then tax records, hour after hour, night after night. The ranch slept while a lamp burned in the records office. Martha often found her there after midnight. One evening, she placed a cup of coffee beside Savannah. "You remind me of someone." Savannah looked up. Who? Garrett's father?" Martha smiled faintly. He wouldn't quit either. Savannah returned to the records. Pages turned, receipts stacked, dates compared. Then suddenly she stopped. Her eyes narrowed. One transport document carried a date that didn't fit. Another referenced a filing that shouldn't have existed. A third mentioned an archived survey stored years earlier in Dry Hollow. She sat up straight. The county copy wasn't the original. The original still existed somewhere. The next morning, she placed the documents in front of Eli Turner. The lawyer studied them. His expression slowly changed. "My God." "What is it?" Garrett asked. Eli tapped the paper. "This references the original survey records." Garrett leaned forward. "Where?" "The old county archive." Savannah felt her pulse quicken. "Then that's where we need to go." A winter storm arrived 2 days later. Snow swept across the valley. Wind bent the cottonwoods near the creek. Most people stayed indoors. Savannah did not. Before dawn, she buttoned her coat and stepped onto the porch. Eli Turner waited with a wagon. Garrett emerged from the barn. Snow clung to his shoulders. "You shouldn't be making this trip." Savannah met his eyes. "If those records exist, they're our chance to. The roads are bad. So we'll go slowly." For a moment, neither moved. The wind blew between them. Then Garrett stepped closer and adjusted the scarf around her neck. The gesture was simple, careful, almost reluctant. "Come back before dark." Savannah nodded. "I will." The road to Dry Hollow disappeared beneath drifting snow. The wagon rocked through frozen ruts. Hours later, they reached the old county archive behind the courthouse. Dust coated everything inside. Shelves sagged beneath decades of records. Eli searched one side. Savannah searched the other. Minutes stretched. Then an hour. Finally, her fingers found a leather tube hidden behind property ledgers. She carefully unrolled it. Original survey maps, official seals, dates, signatures, everything. Her breath caught. "Eli." The lawyer hurried over. One look was enough. "We found it." Relief flooded through her, but only for a moment. A strange smell drifted through the room. Smoke. Eli turned sharply. Smoke seeped beneath the archive door. His face went pale. Someone had locked them inside. And somewhere beyond the thick wooden walls, flames were beginning to spread. Savannah tightened her grip on the original documents, because suddenly saving the ranch was no longer the only thing that mattered. They first had to survive long enough to leave the building. And far away at Hayes Ridge, Garrett Hayes had no idea the woman he loved was trapped inside a burning archive with the evidence that could save everything. Smoke thickened near the ceiling. Eli Turner pulled his coat over his mouth and rushed toward the door. Locked. He threw his shoulder against it. Nothing. Savannah wrapped the survey records inside her shawl and held them tightly against her chest. The papers felt strangely heavy now, not because of their weight, because of what they meant. Outside, the wind howled through Dry Hollow. Inside the archive, flames began climbing one wall. Eli! He looked up. A narrow side window sat behind a row of shelves. Together, they dragged the shelves aside. Wood scraped across the floor. Glass shattered beneath Eli's elbow. Cold winter air rushed inside. One by one, they squeezed through the opening. Moments later, both stood in the snow-covered alley as smoke poured from the roof. Savannah looked back only once. Someone had wanted those records destroyed. Someone had wanted the truth buried forever. By sunrise, they were already heading back toward Hayes Ridge. Garrett met them halfway down the road. His horse appeared through the blowing snow. The moment he saw Savannah safe, something in his face changed. Relief. Pure and immediate. He climbed down before his horse fully stopped. Are you hurt? Savannah shook her head. His eyes searched hers anyway. Checking. Making sure. Only after he was satisfied did he notice the bundle in her arms. The records? Savannah held them out. We found them. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Garrett carefully took the documents. Not like papers, like hope. The trial began 4 days later. Every bench inside the Dry Hollow courthouse was full. Farmers, merchants, ranch hands, widows, people whose lives depended on land. Judge Wilcox sat at the front. Vernon Pike looked confident, almost amused. Until Eli Turner presented the original survey maps. The room fell silent. One document became 2. 2 became 10. Dates matched. Signatures matched. Official seals matched. The county copies did not. By noon, the truth stood naked in front of everyone. Vernon Pike had altered records, manipulated property claims, and quietly stolen land from struggling families for years. Whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Wilcox removed his spectacles. His expression hardened. The decision came before sunset. Every claim against Hayes Ridge was dismissed. The ranch remained whole. The original property rights were restored, and Vernon Pike left the courthouse a defeated man. Outside, snow melted beneath the first hints of spring. People gathered around Garrett, around Owen, around Eli. But Garrett's eyes searched for only one person. Savannah stood near the hitching rail. Wind moved a loose strand of hair across her cheek. He walked straight to her, without a word, without caring who watched. He took her hand and held it. The spring festival arrived several weeks later. Medicine Bow Valley looked different. The snow had retreated into the mountains. Wildflowers pushed through the grass. Children ran between market stalls. Music drifted from the town square. Savannah stood beside Martha Quinn watching families pass. People greeted her now, not with curiosity, with respect. Then Garrett climbed onto the small wooden platform near the center of town. The crowd gradually quieted. He rarely spoke in public. Everyone knew that. Garrett looked across the valley, then toward Savannah. When I married Savannah Reed, he began, most people thought I was rescuing her. A few quiet laughs moved through the crowd. He shook his head. I thought so too. His gaze never left her. I wanted to save her from a future someone else had chosen. Silence settled over the square. Then his voice softened. But she's the one who saved Hayes Ridge. He paused. She's the one who saved me. Savannah lowered her eyes, not out of embarrassment, because the moment felt too large to hold. The crowd rose to its feet. One person, then another, then dozens more. Applause rolled across the square. Martha wiped at her eyes. Owen grinned openly. Even people who once doubted her stood and clapped. Garrett stepped down from the platform. He stopped in front of Savannah. The noise around them seemed to disappear. For a moment, it was only the two of them, just as it had been the day he walked into Vernon Pike's bank. Only now, everything was different. 10 years passed. Hayes Ridge became the strongest ranch in Medicine Bow Valley, not because of cattle alone, because people trusted it. Savannah built a small schoolhouse near the south pasture. She organized records for ranchers who couldn't read complicated contracts. She created a fund to help widows survive difficult winters. Garrett remained exactly what he had always been. Steady, reliable. The first one awake every morning, the last to leave the barn at night. 3 children grew up beneath the Wyoming sky. Their laughter filled the valley. One autumn evening, the sun settled behind the red mountains. Golden light covered the fields. Savannah and Garrett sat together on the porch. The years had touched their faces, not their bond. Below them, cattle drifted toward the barns. The smell of fresh-cut hay carried on the breeze. Garrett looked toward the horizon. "If you could choose again," he asked quietly, "would you still climb into that wagon?" Savannah watched their children in the distance. Then she smiled. "When it happened, I thought my life was ending." She reached for his hand, the same hand that had once rescued her from a debt she could never repay. "Now I know it was the day my life truly began." Garrett squeezed her fingers gently. The last sunlight slipped across the valley. Children laughed below. A ranch bell rang in the distance. 2 weathered hands remained joined between them. And as the evening settled over Medicine Bow Valley, the story that began with a forced marriage ended the way all great love stories hope to end. Not with a rescue, not with a victory, but with 2 people choosing each other again and again through every season that followed. The cattle returned home. The lamps inside Hayes Ridge glowed warm against the coming night. And beneath the Wyoming sky, their love remained exactly where it belonged. Home. As I think about Savannah and Garrett sitting on that porch, watching the sun settle beyond the hills, I find myself wondering what any of us would have done in their place. What if the hardest day of your life turned out to be the doorway to the life you were meant to find? What if the person standing beside you wasn't there to rescue you, but to walk beside you while you found your own strength? Savannah began this journey feeling trapped by a choice she never wanted. Garrett carried years of loneliness behind a quiet face, yet neither of them was healed in a single moment. It happened slowly, through trust, through patience, through ordinary days, through choosing each other when life became difficult. Maybe that's what makes their story feel real. Love is not only found in grand promises. Sometimes it lives in a shared cup of coffee before sunrise, in a hand reaching across a table, in staying when leaving would be easier, in believing that a wounded heart can still grow something beautiful. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments. What was your favorite moment in Savannah and Garrett's journey? And if you enjoy spending time in these forgotten valleys, among people who find courage, healing, and love when they least expect it, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more stories waiting just beyond the next trail, stories of second chances, quiet mysteries, and hearts that refuse to give up. Until then, thank you for sharing this evening with us.